Well, that is indeed one of the issues that we are going to discuss over the next half hour, as we talk about the so-called alt-right, a phrase that is used for a group of people that also get labelled as white supremacists, white nationalists, neo-Nazis by some. We're going to speak to a number of people who have been looking at this as an issue, as Donald Trump, in his interview with the New York Times, has disavowed and condemned a group that was seen on camera, filmed by The Atlantic at a conference in Washington, using Nazi salutes in response to a speaker. Okay, let me just introduce you to a few of the live guests we've got to discuss this. We can speak to Tom White, who's editor of Virginia Right, which is a conservative blog. Hi there, Tom.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Also, George Hawley is with us, Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Alabama. Hi, George.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you for your time. And we can also speak to Bob Parks, who is a political blogger with Black and Blonde Media. Hi there, Bob. Where are you in the US today?
I am in Virginia. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being there. Now, I mentioned this group that we see in this video posted online, this conference of the so-called alt-right. One of its leading voices is a guy called Richard Spencer, who addressed the meeting.
Hail Trump! Hail our people! Hail victory! To be white is to be a striver, a crusader, an explorer, and a conqueror. We were not meant to beg for moral validation from some of the most despicable creatures to ever populate the planet. We were meant to overcome all of it, because that is natural and normal for us.
That was Richard Spencer, the man seen in that video posted online by The Atlantic from inside that conference, that meeting of the so-called alt-right in Washington, a term that we've addressed that is contentious, that we'll discuss in a moment. We'll also discuss with our guests here on World Have Your Say about the prominence or otherwise that these people should be given. And let me talk to Bob Parks, who is a political blogger with Black and Blonde Media. And also we now have Yoni Applebaum with us, who's the Washington bureau chief for the aforementioned Atlantic. Yoni, welcome to the programme. I took through Richard Spencer through some of the terms used to describe his group and others like it, like white supremacist, like neo-Nazi, like white nationalist. Which of those do you think are appropriate?
Well, I think that Spencer himself is easier to characterize than his followers, who are a motley bunch who subscribe primarily to a variety of different causes. Spencer is fairly clearly a white nationalist. As you pointed out, that there were things in his speech that certainly seem indistinguishable from white supremacy, and he says playing with the tropes of Nazism in an ironic fashion, but this is at some point a distinction without a difference, to the extent that he's embracing and using these and doing so with the plausible deniability of being able to back off and say irony. He certainly seems to perfectly comfortable with the tropes of Nazism. So you have that attached to Spencer himself. His movement, which he describes as the alt-right, draws on a variety of different groups united in their sense of resentment at what has happened, as they see it, to white men in the United States, but everyone from neo-monarchists over to video gamer rights activists, and so they're a little harder to characterize with a single label, which is why we and other outlets have sometimes used their own self-description and then endeavor to make it as clear as possible what it is that these folks believe and stand for.
Bob Parks, come in here. How do you describe groups such as the one that Richard Spencer's involved with?
Well, I feel fairly inadequate now in this conversation because I've been a person who's been studying and watching and doing political commentary for over 20 years. And up until this video, you know something? I had never heard of Mr. Spencer and his group. And for that reason, I give them minimal, if anything, importance in the grand scheme of things. He's been elevated and propped up as far as the aftermath of the Trump election. But what I do see here is another liberal media ploy at guilt by association. When the John Podesta emails that came out via WikiLeaks that disparaged blacks or Latinos, the first thing we heard from the left is those emails were taken out of context. Those were supposed to be secret. Now, when you come to this documentary being done by The Atlantic, documentaries are normally portrayed as these really intellectual thought pieces that are put out, and they are totally accurate because they are documentaries. I'll tell you something, and everybody who's in the business knows that documentaries are basically vehicles used to push one point of view as far as advocacy is concerned.
So Bob, the point you're making is that Donald Trump's election, you're saying that liberal journalists have made this more prominent than it should be because they're trying to pin these people to the newly elected president.
Well, with all due respect, my response to that would be duh. Again, when we do documentaries, when my wife and I go out and we videotape events, we videotape and we present the whole event, not just cherry pick a 5-minute section out and that we can tarnish. We let people decide for themselves. Again, when John Podesta referred to blacks as being lazy or the needy Latinos, that was taken out of context. This whole alt-right thing is just a manufactured action line that is now being repeated ad hominem by the media to discredit Donald Trump and his supporters by calling them all racist. When liberals are losing arguments in this country, the first thing they do is scream racism, not to engage in conversation, but to make the other side shut up.
And Bob, that will be our launching off point for Yoni to respond to at the beginning of the second half of the programme. We have to pause at this moment to take the news. Yoni, I'll let you respond to that and have a conversation with Bob just on the other side of the news headlines and get you guys talking through that point, and we'll continue to have this discussion. We'll continue, though, the conversation we've started on the so-called alt-right, otherwise known by lots of people as a group that includes white supremacists, that includes neo-Nazis. We heard a little from Richard Spencer, who is one of the people pictured in that video that loads of people have been sharing that Donald Trump has addressed in an interview with the New York Times recently. Now, we heard just before the news from Bob Parks, a political blogger with Black and Blonde Media, and Bob was talking about documentaries such as the one he was talking about being made by The Atlantic, and that clip I guess arose from because Yoni Applebaum of The Atlantic, the Washington bureau chief there, was explaining that the clip posted online of that so-called alt-right conference arose because a couple of people making a documentary for The Atlantic were there. So Yoni, why don't you reply to Bob's point that documentaries like the one you're making simply serve to distort and put across a point of view?
Well, I think it was an outrageous and grossly irresponsible way to characterize our journalism and had absolutely no connection to the work we actually published. This was a 3-minute clip of Richard Spencer. It featured only his own words. Neither Spencer nor anyone else in attendance has alleged that it was cut in a misleading fashion. The full 40-minute speech is also available online, and viewers and listeners are perfectly welcome to go and watch the whole thing for themselves. What they'll find is that it accurately represents both the tone of the overall speech and excerpts its content. We could have cut a different 3 minutes out of it and given precisely the same impression. I think his broader point here, amid the obfuscation, though, is also misleading and wrong. That there are very good reasons to pay attention to Richard Spencer, even as it is Spencer's agenda to get the media to pay the maximum amount of attention to him and his movement. One of those reasons is that the new senior counselor to the president ran a news site that billed itself, in his words, as the platform of the alt-right, and that has fueled interest in what the alt-right is. And going and filming the man who popularized the term alt-right describe what his movement sees in a Trump presidency is inherently newsworthy. The other is that Spencer is something of a barometer. When you see, your listeners heard Spencer describe how he feels validated and empowered by the election of Donald Trump, how he sees these results as incremental move toward his ideas, even though he doesn't see Trump or those around him as in precise ideological alignment. That is potentially cause for concern to the extent that there are others out there who are prone to radicalization, and may similarly feel empowered by this moment.
Bob, come in here and talk to Yoni. Go ahead.
Well, I think if we go back 8 short years when the Reverend Jeremiah Wright said some things that conform to the black nationalist sentiment, and Barack Obama was someone who was in his church for how many years, I think that there was a genuine condemnation of the implication that Barack Obama had any of the same feelings that Jeremiah Wright did. That was totally outrageous. But guilt by association, linking this obscure Richard Spencer and his group to Donald Trump and his supporters is totally genuine and is something that needs to be investigated. I think that there's, again, another double standard here where it is okay to link a clearly fringe white supremacist group to Donald Trump and his supporters, whereas when you had another black nationalist group, Barack Obama frequented his church. I mean, he married Michelle and Barack Obama, and that was totally out of bounds. We couldn't go there because it was inconvenient to the left's narratives. And when it comes to the use of the alt-right, constantly being used by the media today, the media has also been caught over the years getting certain action lines from the White House, and then all of a sudden they're all repeating the same words, and montages have been made of the use of the word gravitas or the word dark after one of the debates.
Thank you very much indeed for ending that conversation. Thanks to Yoni and to Bob.